This inexhaustible print by Hokusai, made in 1831, is, as you know, one of the icons of world art. We can interpret it as a statement of the human condition. Nature's mighty and different powers create and destroy life. We are at nature's mercy. We can also interpret it as an image of Japan's essential identity as a place of islands, plural, in which the sea envelops the land. Thinking about it having been made in 1831, it is also an uncanny foreshadowing of the changes that are about to come to Japan, the waves of destruction and renewal. Often great art by some mysterious power looks ahead to what's coming. This equally brilliant print by Harunobu also tells us what's happening historically. Remember, Edo period Japan pursued a policy of isolationism, forbidding outside trade with anyone but China and the Dutch. So the geisha and her apprentice are looking out at the harbor using a Dutch-made telescope, an artifact of Western technology, which involves the use of a lens. The harbor reminds us that in the 1800s, American and Russian commercial vessels would approach Japan's ports wanting whaling trade relations. Remember, whale oil was a major commodity, a major fuel source in the 1800s. And Tokyo Edo period Japan had an official policy of rebuffing them. And the policy was that anyone who washed ashore would be killed. So U.S. commercial interests, the business people who wanted that whale oil, they sought to break through Japan's isolationist policies. As was often the case in history, the capitalists sought the support of the nation's military to make that happen. And so in 1853, the United States naval commander, Commodore Perry, was sent on a mission of so-called gunboat diplomacy, meaning his ships sailed through Japanese lines directly toward Edo with guns on display. The message, of course, was trade with us or submit to our guns. And so this witty Japanese print by an unknown artist is a portrait of Commodore Perry with fellow naval officers. Notice that the artist has included a globe at the feet of one of the seamen in a very knowledgeable allusion to imperialism. So back to Hokusai's wave, knowing history from our vantage point, we can look at it retrospectively and thinking of it as an image of the coming age of imperialist militarism that would sweep across the world in the total violence of World War II. So I want to move from Hokusai and Harunobu and the Edo period to the period after World War II, to think about the survivors of that unthinkable trauma and the ways that culture changed. And I want to do that by looking at two enormously creative Japanese photographers. The first is Shomei Tomatsu. I chose him for a few reasons. One, I had the incredible pleasure and privilege of working on the major exhibition, the retrospective exhibition of his work that SF MoMA put together around 2006. So a retrospective is an art exhibition that considers the entire sweep of an artist's career from their earliest work on throughout their life. And with Tomatsu, looking at his work from the 1940s through the 2000s gives a story of post-war Japanese life. He worked as a documentary photographer. He started around 1945 or so, using his camera to record Japanese people as they recovered from the war and absorbed American culture during the post-war American occupation of Japan. He himself had lived through the war. He was coming of age during the American occupation. He had known the horror of war. He was witness to the transformation of Japanese culture. So his first important body of work, his breakthrough series of photographs, was made in the 1950s, and he titled it Chewing Gum and Chocolate, because it documents the American occupation of Japan and the way American culture was infiltrating Japanese culture. So chewing gum and chocolate are definitely not indigenous Japanese foods. And Tomatsu, in his interviews and memoirs, recalled that the American soldiers who were stationed in Japan would toss those American junk food treats to Japanese children. So this is an amazing photograph where we see a Japanese girl blowing this enormous bubble, which frames her face. And that's all right in the foreground, so close up. And then deep in the space, in the background, we see an American soldier walking out of a nightclub, the Bar Oasis, right? And the English name tells us right away that this bar is catering to American servicemen. Notice how Tomatsu's photograph invokes and evokes pictures of the floating world. The bubble itself conjures the sense of a floating world. And artistically, Tomatsu is taking up the ukiyo-e themes of nightlife, the bar oasis, of entertainment, and of consumer pleasures. He's also playing with an art that is about seeing and framing, right? So just as we saw in Horonobu's print, where the geisha apprentice looks through the window with her telescope, and the print makes a theme out of looking, out of spectacle. So here we see through the bubble, as if we are having a heightened awareness of seeing itself. Remember also how Hiroshige framed the subject in that incredibly inventive way that Van Gogh and Degas and other French painters so admired, where we have the tree branches and blossoms pressed very close forward, and then separating us, but also pulling our eye back toward the scene in the distance, which is exactly what Tomatsu is playing with. So in looking at these links between ukiyo-e and Tomatsu, I also want to emphasize photography itself as a technology. While it was a Western import into Japan, camera technology itself relies on the earlier technology of printmaking. The idea of an imprint that can be reproduced, which was at the heart of Japanese woodblock printing, that is fundamental to pre-digital photography that Tomatsu is using, right? Because in that pre-digital photography, the camera is capturing a moment by taking in light through the lens and recording the pattern of light and shadow on a light-sensitive material. And then you can make multiple reproductions, right? So reproductions assisted by technology and a mass production skill set. That's another way in which photography, like ukiyo-e prints, is a low art for the people, not a high art for the elites. So let me show you one more great Japanese photographer whose work is brilliant and takes us further into the 20th century, Hiroshi Sugimoto, who marries Japanese culture with global mass culture. So Sugimoto was born in 1948, after the end of World War II. So he's almost a generation younger than Tomatsu, not quite. He came of age in the mid-20th century, which is the age of American hegemony across the globe. The term hegemony is used in political science to refer to a great power that dominates throughout an expansive region, but dominates not through force, not as a military aggressor, but simply as an economic powerhouse that also creates a massive cultural influence. So from the Han Dynasty on, China had been the hegemonic power in East Asia. After World War II, America became the hegemonic power, and American culture was massively influential, not just in East Asia, but across the globe, in great part because of America's economic dominance. So the culture of American film and TV, of rock and roll and Coca-Cola, all of this became internationally part of life. So Sugimoto engaged ironically and ingeniously with America's mass culture in a series of photographs that he took from the 1970s through the 1990s, titled Theaters. And they are essentially a set of photographs in which Sugimoto photographed American movie theaters. Many of the theaters were the kind of ornate, vintage, splendid cinema houses that captured the glamour of Hollywood at its heyday and the romance of the cinema that existed before we all got TVs and could just watch things in our houses. One of my favorites actually is not of the interior of a movie theater, but of a drive-in movie theater. So, as documents of the movie theater setting, the space in which the movie is seen, they show us interesting things about the social ritual of viewership, right? With the aisles, the seats for collective viewing, because that's one of the important things about a movie. We watch it together in large groups, or we did before Netflix, and the screen itself. So these photographs make visible the fact that the 20th century is known as the start of the Society of the Spectacle. These famous words, the Society of the Spectacle, were coined by the Canadian media theorist Marshall McLuhan. On the other hand, urban life in Edo period Japan was already a society of the spectacle, just to a lesser degree. Ukiyo-e artists made images of actors portraying characters in dramatic theatrical productions. Just as the people of Edo went to view Onoe Matsusuke in the theater in 1794, so the people of the 20th century would have gone to a cinema theater to see, let's say, Marlon Brando. But the series is even more profound. It's not just a reflection on our society of the spectacle. Notice that in every photograph, the cinema screen is a blank, glowing field. Sugimoto didn't just take photographs of these sites, these places where film is seen. He actually set his camera exposure to be open for the entire duration of the film, whatever that was, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, whatever the actual running time was. Let me explain that. So when Sugimoto took this photograph, Union City Drive-In, Union City, he left the aperture is the opening between the lens and the film. He left the aperture, which is what takes in the light to make the photograph, he left it open not for one click, but for the entire time of the film. So he did not photograph an instant. We usually think of photographs as click, one instant, as in when we take a photograph with our iPhones. But this was a photograph that is actually of duration. It's of time passing. It is not of an instant. The result of that duration is not an image of what would have been seen on the screen at any moment, but actually turns out to be pure light, a field of glowing emptiness. So his photographs actually work with Japanese Buddhist ideas and aesthetics, because he is engaging with the Buddhist concepts of impermanence and emptiness. Let me back up for a moment and make clear or clearer what this means in terms of the technology of film cameras, right, which is the camera technology that existed prior to digital cameras. Digital cameras use pixels and computer code to assemble an image. The earlier cameras, film cameras, used film light-sensitive strips. The image is made on this strip of film that has been coated in a light-sensitive emulsion. So technically speaking, a photograph made this way results from light entering the camera lens, and that light then leaves a trace, a physical trace on the film. This kind of photographic technology relies on the ordinary observation that some surfaces are altered by light. Your skin is one of them. You go out in the sun and your skin is darkened. An old newspaper will be yellowed by the sun. Those are light-sensitive materials. So the light actually captures the patterns of light and shadow that are in the scene, and then the film is processed in the darkroom to make that larger, the size of a larger picture. But with Sugimoto, we don't get a picture at all. We get a void. We get emptiness. We get Ma, that important aesthetic concept that we talked about when we looked at Bunzai, the idea that the untouched field of open space is all important. So Sugimoto sort of uses photography against itself. Instead of creating a picture, he uses it actually to negate picturing. We still have the picture of the theater, of course, but the implication is that actually the film is not the true reality. The true reality, if we experience it from the flow of time, is this emptiness. So to me, Sugimoto's photographs are unforgettable because they bridge the culture of modernity and the deep longevity of Buddhism. It tells us so much about the world of mass culture, theatrical viewing, spectacle, and then there's this ironic twist. The spectacle actually plays out and it adds up to nothing, in the best sense of nothing, not a negative sense. Because remember, emptiness in Buddhism is actually a very positive term. In Buddhism, emptiness is what we perceive when we have the illusion of conventional reality dissolved in a state of enlightenment, and we don't see separateness. So here is the Diamond Sutra, as translated by Thich Nhat Hanh, considered one of the greatest teachings of the Buddha. All composed things are like a dream. All things that are made up of parts, a phantom, a drop of dew, a flash of lightning. Impermanent. This is how to meditate on them. This is how to observe them. So Sugimoto's photography is actually not a picture of something so much as a meditation on the dream-like nature of reality, in which something that is composed of many parts, such as the film, plays out like a flash of lightning or a drop of dew and leaves us with the pure, open light of emptiness.